So we're now going to cut the shape of our canvases. So what you need to do is line the top of your neck point up with the top of the amount of canvas that you have. Lay the edge of the forepart and the front edge to the edge of the canvas here as well. Allow that simply to fall down nice and straight along the grain of the canvas, bearing in mind that you will have by now shrunk your canvas and pressed them absolutely flat, giving them a really nice firm press. You need to make sure that the bottom of your canvas comes an inch past the bottom of your thread mark for the coat. Now typically speaking, you would have that edge of the canvas come all the way down to the bottom of your inlay. But since we've been rather economical with our canvases here, we are slightly shorter than we tend to be in the based stage. So your first job is to mark round all of these edges. You can lay weights on the cloth to do so, or you can simply trim round. You can do either or. I'm going to mark and then trim. So mark the edges. And then mark the top of the shoulder coming down. And at the side, we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to mark the edge up to about this point here, and then we're going to extend this out past the edge about an inch, and we're going to make that point meet that point, leaving all of that in. We're then going to simply mark our notch with a cross, our front pitch notch, and then we're going to start marking our dart. So I've got my break line there and there. I'll mark very quickly my break as well. The way I do this is by laying a ruler on the break line there and very quickly drawing that through, like so. I'm also going to mark my button position. Same principle, like so, forming a crisscross and making sure I keep everything weighed down. I can now start lifting the job off and repositioning it as needed. I mark the top of my dart in the same way. The waist in my dart over here. And very quickly mark the center line of my dart in place. I can now lift my forepart off, and I have all the necessary marks I need in order to start making my canvases. Now for the sake of ease, what I'm going to do is transfer all the inside marks in the canvas. I forgot to do one last mark, silly me, and that's the mark for the Donlan wedge. So the Donlan wedge, as we said, is this wedge here. We're going to displace it and move it slightly further up so it doesn't create any bulk and interfere with the coat. So the base of it would typically be here. We're going to move it up by about 2 inches. So 2 inches here, 2 inches there, trace a line, and then the Donlan wedge was 3/8 of an inch wide, take it down to there. I then mark my dart up to the waist, and the dart is 1/2 inch wide, so 1/4 of an inch aside, there and there, 1/4 of an inch aside, there and there, up to the waist, like so. Mark my wedge through, line that up to the point of my dart, and I then have the dart made up. I'm then going to want to leave about, so from the bottom of the canvas over here, this section there, to where it intersects the bottom edge of my donlon, I'm going to leave approximately 2 inches. I then measure, if you look closely, I then measure the distance from the edge of my dart to the end of the canvas, which is 2 inches, and reapply that measure up. Sorry, my apologies, the end of my dart is here. So I measure from the edge of my dart on the left hand side here, down to the edge of my canvas, that's 2 5/8, and apply 2 5/8 from the right edge of my dart up. That gives you the lip that you need so that when the dart gets close, all the canvases line up. So I'll do that one more time. From this point here to that point there is 2 5/8. I then apply that same measure from this point here to that point there, 2 5/8. I then, in a swift, nice smooth curve, tie that in. You can now cut out the outer edge of this marked canvas. It doesn't have to be exact. Ideally, it's ever so slightly wider, 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch wider than where you cut it. Remember, you can always trim things back, but if you trim too far, you'll never get it back. I can also cut out my dart at this point. And carry on down. Now it's nice to have a reference for all of these points on the other side as well. And to mark them through, I'm going to use some pins. All I need are the principal points, so dart waist on either side, dart point, front pitch, button, and then break line. Anywhere along the break line, I know that that break line runs into my inlay straight up there. I then transfer these marks across, pulling this over, and crisscrossing all of those intersections. can now remove all of those pins. And retransfer all of those marks nice and safely across. That's your canvas shape now all plotted out. What we're going to do is make sure that we know which side our cloth is going on, so we know where our horsehair and dermet are being added to. We're making a left forepart, so to make sure that I don't make a mistake, I'm literally going to write cloth on here. So I know that my cloth needs to go on top of there, and beneath here needs to go my horsehair and dermet. The next stage is to start cutting out the horsehair. We'll just grab that. So I want the horsehair to run weft perpendicular to the grain, like so. I line the edge of my canvas up, and you should just be able to get it out there, and the horsehair should sit approximately, in this instance should be right, about 3 inches above the button point. Now that I've lined it up, all I do is cut around it. And while I'm cutting around it, I'm going to cut a slight amount of ease all the way around to make sure that I can fill it in. So I'm going to cut a good 1/8 of an inch, slightly bigger, all the way around these areas. Cutting it down the break line and then stopping. I'm going to trim this later. It's hard to trim with the weight there. Move it. Now, what I'm going to do is grab my pattern master and trace my break line in to my horsehair. Like so. I can then lift this off, and I'm going to come back a 1/2 inch from this mark and draw a new line in. Which I will then cut the horsehair to. And that's your horsehair cut. We'll then further trim it ever so slightly by rounding off this edge. Like so. The next stage is to baste your horsehair onto the non-cloth side of your canvas. So the first step, after I've thread my needle, is to remark the line into which the break of my horsehair is going to lie. Now the horsehair sits back from the break line here by a ½ inch. So I make 2 marks. Along my break line, which sits ½ inch back. Draw that line in. Lay the top of my horsehair up against my full part, like so, and then begin basting down it very quickly. As I'm basting it, I'm thinning it in ever so slightly. So you'll see, I'll form a mark at the base here, where my horsehair is lying currently, and we'll see how much it's filled in by. And this is the principle of layering cloths together. Now what we're trying to do is create an excess of length in the horsehair, which sits on top of the canvas, which will be in excess length as opposed to the cloth that sits on top of that. The reason being is it's all going to act as successive springs in order to make sure that every single layer beneath it is being spread out and it has this glass-like, really clean aspect to it. If we don't do this, then what we're going to get is fluttering and disturbances in the top cloth, which are going to look unsightly. So I start by basting up here, and I start about 1 inch from the top. We're going to stagger this at a later date, which is why we start it slightly lower than we think we need to. Back tack in, and as I'm coming in, I'm including ever so slight amounts. You can see how my finger's just lifting ever so slightly the horsehair. We're just including tiny amounts of length in the canvas. These equate to really very little length, but will have a considerable effect overall on the end result. Now you can see that by the time I've come down to the bottom of the canvas, I've included about 1/8 of an inch of length between my initial line and where the horsehair is. It's really very little, but it makes a drastic effect. Now, I do the same thing with the line going down the middle of the canvas. So it's going to go somewhere like this, but I want to make sure that I avoid the darts, which will be cut out. So I'm going to go this way, and then I'm going to go that way. I'm going to reshape that line in black so that you can see it, but please don't do it in black yourselves. So that line is going to go like this, and like that. And you can see where my dart is coming in. I'm avoiding it. As I'm doing this, I'm going to include the same amount of length in my canvas, but I'm going to also include some length in through the width. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up like I did along this line, but I'm also going to pull across. That vector is actually heading diagonally. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing this way. I'm getting some width in and I'm getting some length in. And that will give some spring that way and that way. Again, starting about a good inch from the top, back tacking in place. These bastes can be fairly wide set apart. They're really very momentary. They won't be needed to permanently secure things in place because we'll be hand stitching. second layer of basting there to secure around the dart. And then what I'll be doing is I'll be transferring approximately where the shape of my armhole is going to be. So for that, I need to make sure that I've got my front pitch mark transferred over. I grab a pin and push my pin through. I'll then mark in where my front pitch is, and I draw a line, very vaguely, which comes into the point here and into the point there, creating an intersection with that point there. Now I know that all of this is likely to get cut out, so my baseline needs to come inside of these marks. You don't need to draw this, but for the sake of illustrating it on the video, I will. I'm going to be basting in the same way that I just have, like so. Again, starting about a good inch from the top and filling in as I have done on my other basting lines. I then get to the point where the dart will be cut out, so I back tack and then cross over to the other side, back tack and then continue forward, making sure that I'm creeping that up ever so slightly to include that length through those middle sections. The next step is to grab your domette, which has also been shrunk. Now, your domette will be either cut on the bias, or you'll have a piece of domette which has a good amount of give to it. This means that we don't need to be worried about filling in, as we have done with horsehair. We can just simply iron out any deficits of length that occur, and it's unlikely that any would occur anyway. But having that stretch element to your domette means that you don't need to worry about this process quite so much. This makes it far easier to baste in place. We simply lie it in, like so, flip this over, and baste it in place. And you should be able to see where your horsehair ends, because you should be able to see where your baselines are. For the sake of this video, I'm going to just quickly show where the lines are going so that you can see where I'm basting. But you don't need to draw these lines again. This is just so you can see what I'm doing. Again, we're going to start basting a good inch from the top. I'm going to run these bastes down very quickly, making sure that we're pulling the canvas as we're going down. I'll then carry on putting the canvas, going this way, come across, and then I'll come around the point of my dart and back down to it. Quickly back tack and rethread. Start back up across here. Come across. And then down the middle. Again, I'm making sure that everything's flat as I'm going along. Coming back into my stitch line. And then my final line. To complete the canvases. You can now trim everything back to the same size as the canvas. I then flip this, as you can see, and I leave an 1/8 stagger. So the horsehair ends a 1/2 inch back from the break line, and the demette ends 3/8 of an inch back from the break line. And this prevents any excesses of various layers of cloth from gathering all to one same point and forming bulk, which can both feel not particularly elegant and also shine up when being pressed, or even show to the face of the cloth simply because of that bulk layer. Trim this back. Trim that back. So we pull this over and flip this up, trim this an eighth bigger than the horsehair. Again, same principle, we're staggering here. As we come into the canvas. And then what we're going to do over here is just trim the horsehair back an eighth of an inch on this inside line here. Again, making sure that layers are all coming in different staggered lines. Like so. The last stagger that we need to do is at the top on the shoulder here. I'm going to cut my horsehair back 3/4 of an inch, which is why we began tacking it a good inch down, so that all of that was free. Sorry, I'm going to do this from the other side. There, and then I'm going to trim my domette back a good 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. And that means that all of that is now layered and thin on the extremities. The last bit that we need to do in the canvas is to cut up our dart and to close it. We transfer the canvas over to the cloth side and quite literally cut our dart open, making sure that everything's flat. Like so. Make sure you've been precise and you can get those last bits out. All you need to do now is what we'll do once we get to the machine. Is grab a layer of silicea that covers it and zigzag that all in to close all of that through. So we're now going to cut the stays for the canvas. So the first stay that we're going to cut is for our dart. We're going to cut a strip that's 2 inches wide, and that is the length of our dart, like so. The dart sits in a couple inches past here, and then a couple inches past the top. So in fact, this entire strip here is good enough for me. I'm going to now cut that out. Like so. The next thing we're going to do is cut what we call a bridle. Now the bridle is a bit of cloth that can be lining, or it can be an India tape, or it can be silicea, or it can be fused silicea sometimes. It's basically something that's inextensible, it can't be stretched, that makes sure that the length of the brake line from here to here cannot stretch. In fact, it doesn't just stop it from stretching, it also pulls it in ever so slightly. So what we're going to do is cut the strip. Again, this one will be 2.5 inches wide, and it's going to go down the warp of our silicea piece. And we want to make sure that it's the same length, or a couple inches longer at least, than our brake line itself. So I measure from the bottom up to the top of my canvas, and that is 21 inches, and I'll add an inch, 22. It'll actually end shorter than that, but it's better to have more than not have enough. So 2.5 inches there and there. making sure that all my edges are nice and straight. I'm taking the time to make sure that the work is nice and neat. Even if it's on the inside and it's not visible, it doesn't matter. Everything needs to be nice and neat. So we'll start with basting in the bridle. I'll start the bridle up here and I'll stagger it like so, about 1/4 of an inch lower than the demet. I'll lay it in 1/8 of an inch out from the demet, again staggered, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to baste 1/4 of an inch in. That all sounds quite complicated, but if you simply look at what's happening, we've staggered it either side and we're basting it a seam in from the bridle edge. The first step, once you've thread your needle, is to tack it into place, and then you need to determine how much you're going to be pulling it by. So, first step, tack it in. And tack this one in securely because you're going to be pulling it. Second step is to lay this flat now, and what you want to be doing is to cut this to the same length as the demet, and then determine how much you want to shrink it by. I would recommend, usually on a 40-inch jacket, you can just about stretch your bridle by about 3/8 of an inch. Anything more will cause flutters in the canvassing and cause other issues. Anything less will not help you out in the fitting room. There are calculations for determining how much this needs to be shrunk without causing disturbances, but for the sake of making our lives easier, we're simply going to shrink it by 3/8 of an inch. Again, this is another reminder, everything that we're doing here is neither right nor wrong, it's a method, and it isn't to be considered as the one method that can be used. So now what I'm going to do is take a pin and pull that bridle down to the edge of the demet down here. You saw it was laying with a distance here. I'm now going to pull that to there and pop a pin in. Now, where this excess length goes is important. We want it to be in the middle third of the bridle. So between, you can measure this out accurately, which is what I would usually do, or you can do it visually by eye, which is what some people prefer to do. For the sake of speed here, I'm simply going to measure it by eye, and I'm going to pin this in place flat here, that in place flat there, and the 3/8 shrinkage is going to happen in between this section. I'm going to pop some extra pins in there just to secure everything in place a little bit further, making sure again that my bridle is offset from my demet. I'm now going to baste that all into place. Tack that off nice and securely, and then run a second stitch down it to really secure it down. When I baste to secure things down, I rebaste in between my entry and exit points. Don't be tempted to rebaste exactly where you've been in. You need to stagger your stitches. So I'm going in between this time round. Tack it off securely. I can now remove my pins. What we're going to do, after we've been to the machine and zigzagged our Silesia stay in to close our dart, we're going to go to the iron, we're going to shrink all of this in, and we're then going to flip our bridle over and then baste it down and secure it so that it's really pulling in that section of our coat. So we start by taking our Silesia stay and laying it down a couple of inches past the top. We then grab our canvas, securing our Silesia stay down, and lay that with the point an inch down from where the needle is going to start laying. We then make sure that the dart is laying in the middle of our stay and that there is an excess of stay sitting at the top. So that's where we're stitching. We're starting to stitch about an inch above our dart point, and the stay extends past the dart point by a couple of inches. So we're going to be able to trim things down as we need. We then also make sure that as we're sewing our dart, our stay is in the middle of the dart center, like that. So we don't back tack. We begin simply by stitching a line and starting slightly offset to the left and heading into the edge of a dart. Now we start by lining our foot up with the raw edge of the dart that we've cut out, and again we're laying everything flat and we're making sure that our dart is running through the middle of our stay. Once we get to the very top of our wedge, we back tack a few times and come out. We can now trim our threads and make sure that we've done our jobs properly, which we have. So now what we do is we come back to where we were, making sure that the Silesia stay is flat underneath and hasn't folded over. We relay our needle in the same place, but this time slightly offset to the right, making sure again that there is enough stay in there to be stitched down. And this time what we're doing is we are ever so slight, we're beginning to close the dart up against itself as we're stitching down, making sure that the amount of length from one side to the next along the length of the siliceous stay is the same. It helps sometimes just to pop a pin in there to make sure that you're on track. So round here, no back tacks to start off with, closing our dart edge to edge, pivoting round and stitching all the way down the length of the dart, making sure that the length here ends up the same on either side. As soon as we get to the edge of the wedge, same thing, come right into the edge and then a couple stitches back. And now trimmed everything out, and I can take that pin out. So the reason why we don't back tack up here is because we don't want to create any bulk, and we start further up than we need, so there's no tension on the threads over here, which means that they won't come unraveled. They also crisscross one another, so they're going to hold one another down. We can now head over to the board, press our bridle, press this out, trim our siliceous stay, and then baste the edge of our bridle back down, and our canvases are made up once we've closed our wedge as well. So the first thing we're going to do is shrink the bridle in place. We're going to use a sleeve board to get the shape out. Now that we've got a dart in place, we cannot press this canvas flat anymore. We can only press it over a sleeve board, eliminating any of the shape, or over a ham if we need to press where the dart is. But you're forbidden from now on to press this canvas flat, otherwise you'll be undoing all of the work that you've done up until now to create shape. So again, tiny little amounts of steam, and then drying that steam off, and letting things then cool down. And now I'm going to flip it, give it a quick press on the other side, and now turn the bridle over. And I'm just going to press out that crease that I've basted in. Bridle's now in place. All that is left is to baste down the other side of it. We're now going to grab a ham, and we're going to start pressing the dart in the canvas. So I'm using the sleeve board to eliminate shape that's included in the canvas. So the dart is always left to one edge or the other of the sleeve board and hanging off to one side. As soon as I need to press the dart and I've got this bump here, I have to fill that with the ham and press around that. But you're forbidden from now on from pressing this dart flat. If you do so, you're eliminating the shape, you're changing the fit, and it's unlikely that your canvassing will look good. So again, you're pressing things flat only with the dart laid over to one side or the other, hanging off the board where you've eliminated the shape, or if you need to press on the dart with the ham beneath it and the dart at the point of one of the curves of the ham. I'm now going to trim the silicea stay. So I'm going to shove my shears right beneath where my back tacks are and cut that. Beware not to cut your canvas wedge through. And then I'm going to simply trim about 1/4 of an inch either side of my stitch lines. All the way down, being careful not to cut my canvas. Now, I'm going to grab a little strip of fusible, bearing in mind my Donlan wedge is in fact a dart, and I'm going to reverse it like so. I'm going to add a little bit of curve to one of the edges. Again, eliminating all square edges. I'm going to lay this as I would a dart, so with all of the length hanging off, pop that into one corner, lay it flat, and in the middle, and close it like so. Take your time here and make sure that you don't heat up the sticky with your iron. Now that you've secured it more or less in place, you can grab a little bit of silicea to further heat up that last edge. Now, leave this in place to cool down. And once it's no longer so hot to the touch, we can start moving it. We've now secured that in place. We're now going to go back to the board and do a couple more stitches. So now what I'm just going to do is pad this layer of fusible in place so that it doesn't come unstuck. So either side of it, back tack in place, and pad stitch. Secure it in. So. And last pad stitch is to secure the bridle in place. Flip this like so. Then, now that there's an awful lot of shape in here, we're going to eliminate that by laying something beneath it, which will hold the canvas up. And we're going to stitch down the length of the bridle. can now trim our bridle down. And the very last step in creating these canvases is to do a zigzag stitch or a wave stitch across the start to secure it nicely in place. So this is your canvas all sewn up. To pad stitch your canvas, you're going to split it into 3 sections. Draw a line straight up your dart. And then draw another line which runs along your chest line, parallel with your pitch. This splits your canvas into 3 sections, 1, 2, 3. Your first line of pad stitching will go across, and your second and third lines will go up and down. I'm going to remark those runs to make sure that you can see them properly. There and there. Across, up and down, up and down. Now the reason why we split them into sections is because this makes it easier to handle the canvas. Also, there'll be a lot of shape into this section here, so it's quite difficult to manipulate the canvas if you're going across in this way. We're going to pad bottom to top, inside to outside, and inside to outside. Now the last thing you need to be careful of is the fact that we have an excess of canvas all the way through here. We don't want to be padding into sections that we're then going to trim. If we turn this canvas around, you can see where we've drawn this line coming through. We're going to pad to that line. All you do is simply mark this through, like so, and pad stitch within these areas. I'll do 1 row for each. Ensure when you're padding that you do not knot your thread. If you knot, you can create a thickness which will create a shine. And what you're doing is ideally you're sat down with your knees up against you and you're starting from the bottom up, grab your canvas like so and begin stitching from the bridle. Back tack only once and go down in about 3/4 inch catches. Your next stitch line falls in the middle of each catch that you initially made. I'll show you a close-up once I finish this line, but you're going back and forth all the way until you meet the top. I'm going to back tack here. I'll quickly show this up to the camera. As you can see, you have 1 line going down and 1 line going up with your catches at intersecting points. Once you've padded all the way up, you then flip your canvas this way and continue. from centre out, starting over here. Tacking once, going down. And then back up. And so on. And once you've covered this entire section, you begin the next one. Flipping your canvas over. Again, starting from the centre and heading outwards. Make sure while you're doing this that you're making a sufficient catch on the underside to combine all the layers together nice and securely, and that you're not creating any discrepancies in length between all layers. They need to stay in exactly the same locations in which you've basted them down. That is to say, no shifting. Things need to remain static as you're padding them. And again, keep padding until you get all the way to here. So again, we're going to start without backtacking, simply within the stitch lines that we've created, and we're going to wave down very gently within those stitch lines to further secure the start in place. No need to backtack, simply undo it, and that's your canvas made up.